What happens when the most powerful CEO in New York City meets the one woman who refuses to bow down to his wealth? This is the story of Alexander Kane, a man who built an empire but lost his heart in the process, and Emma Rodriguez, the struggling artist who would change everything he thought he knew about love. Alexander Kane wasn't just any billionaire. At 34, he was the youngest CEO to ever run Kane Industries, a tech empire worth over $50 billion. But success had come at a price. After his fiancée Sarah left him 3 years ago, taking half his trust and all of his faith and love with her, Alexander had built walls around his heart as impenetrable as his corporate fortress. "You've become cold, Alex," Sarah had said that final night, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor of their penthouse. "All you care about is money and power. I can't live with a man who's forgotten how to feel." Those words haunted him. But instead of changing, Alexander doubled down on his isolation. He fired 3 assistants in 6 months, each one failing to meet his impossible standards. He worked 18-hour days, acquired 12 companies, and hadn't taken a single day off in 2 years. This particular Tuesday started like any other. Alexander's morning routine was military precise. 4:30 a.m. workout, protein shake, review quarterly reports while his driver navigated Manhattan traffic. But fate had other plans. When his Bentley pulled up to Kane Industries, he spotted something that made him pause: a young woman sitting on the steps of his building, sketching. Emma Rodriguez had been waiting for 3 hours. The 28-year-old art teacher had lost her job when the community center closed due to budget cuts. Her savings were gone, rent was due, and this interview at Kane Industries was her last hope. She didn't want to work in corporate America, but desperation had a way of reshaping dreams. As Alexander approached, Emma looked up from her sketchbook. Their eyes met for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for something to shift in Alexander's carefully constructed world. She had paint under her fingernails, wild curly hair escaping from a messy bun, and wore a vintage dress that probably cost less than his morning coffee. She was everything his world wasn't: authentic, unpolished, real. "Are you Alexander Kane?" Emma asked, standing up and extending her hand. No nervous giggling, no batting eyelashes, just direct eye contact and a firm handshake. "I am. And you're late for your interview." "Actually, I'm 3 hours early. I was sketching your building while I waited. Want to see?" Before Alexander could respond, Emma had flipped her sketchbook around. The drawing was incredible. She'd captured not just the architectural details of Kane Industries, but somehow conveyed the cold, imposing nature of the structure. It looked like a beautiful prison. "Interesting perspective," Alexander said, studying the sketch. "Most people see this building as a symbol of success." "I see what I see," Emma replied. "Sometimes the most successful-looking things are the loneliest." Those words hit Alexander like a physical blow. For a moment, his CEO mask slipped, and Emma caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in his steel-gray eyes. But just as quickly, the walls went back up. "Let's get this interview over with," he said, turning toward the building. The elevator ride to the 52nd floor was silent except for the soft hum of machinery. Emma noticed how Alexander stood perfectly straight, never touching the walls, creating an invisible barrier around himself. Even in an enclosed space, he managed to seem untouchable. Alexander's office was a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, awards lining the walls, and a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. But Emma noticed what was missing. No personal photos, no plants, nothing that suggested a human being actually worked there. "Why do you want to work here, Ms. Rodriguez?" Alexander asked, settling behind his desk like a king on his throne. "Honestly, I don't. I need a job, you need an assistant, and I'm really good at organizing chaos. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you enjoyed coming to work?" Alexander's pen stopped moving across the application. No one had ever asked him that question. No one had ever dared to turn an interview around on him. This isn't about enjoyment. It's about results. Right. And how's that working out for you? 3 assistants in 6 months suggests your system might need some adjusting. The audacity of this woman should have ended the interview immediately. Instead, Alexander found himself leaning forward, genuinely curious about what she'd say next. "You think you can handle working for me?" "Mr. Kane, I spent 5 years teaching art to teenagers in the South Bronx. I've broken up knife fights, talked kids out of dropping out, and once convinced a gang member that painting was cooler than vandalism. Trust me, I can handle one grumpy billionaire." For the first time in months, Alexander almost smiled. Almost. The job pays $80,000 a year. Standard benefits. You'll work 60-hour weeks minimum, handle my calendar, manage correspondence, and basically ensure my life runs smoothly. No personal questions, no attempts at friendship, strictly professional. Can you handle that? Emma stood up and extended her hand again. "You've got yourself an assistant, Mr. Kane. But fair warning, I've never met a heart I couldn't crack open. Yours might be more challenging than most, but everyone deserves to feel human again." As Alexander shook her hand, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years: genuine curiosity about another person. Emma Rodriguez was about to turn his perfectly ordered world upside down, and neither of them had any idea just how dramatically their lives were about to change. Emma's first day at Kane Industries was like stepping into an alternate universe. The 48th floor, where executive assistants worked, operated with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every conversation was conducted in hushed tones, every movement calculated to avoid drawing attention from the intimidating man on the 52nd floor. "Rule number 1, whispered Janet, a veteran assistant to the CFO. "Mr. Kane drinks his coffee black, exactly at 7 a.m., 11 a.m., and 3 p.m. No exceptions. Rule number 2, never ever interrupt him when his office door is closed. Rule number 3, if he seems angry, which is most of the time, just stay invisible until it passes." Emma listened politely, but something about treating another human being like a dangerous animal didn't sit right with her. Alexander Kane was clearly hurt, not heartless. She'd seen that flicker of vulnerability during their interview, and she recognized the signs of someone who'd been wounded so deeply they'd convinced themselves that feeling nothing was better than risking feeling everything. Her first test came within hours. Alexander had been in back-to-back meetings since 8 a.m., and Emma noticed he'd skipped lunch entirely. When 3 p.m. arrived and she brought his coffee, she also brought a sandwich from the deli downstairs. "I didn't ask for food," Alexander said without looking up from his computer. "No, but you haven't eaten since yesterday's dinner meeting. Your 4 p.m. call with Tokyo is crucial, and you'll think clearer if your blood sugar isn't crashing." Alexander finally looked at her. "How do you know what I ate yesterday?" "Your calendar syncs to my computer. Yesterday shows a dinner meeting at Le Bernardin that ended at 9 p.m., followed by 3 hours of work here in the office. This morning you had coffee with the investors at 6 a.m., coffee only, no breakfast on the calendar. Today's schedule shows no lunch break. It's not rocket science, Mr. Kane." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Alexander picked up the sandwich. As he unwrapped it, Emma noticed his hands, strong and capable, but there was a slight tremor from exhaustion and too much caffeine. "Turkey and Swiss, no mayo, mustard on the side," Emma said. "I guessed, but I figured a man who takes his coffee black probably doesn't like unnecessary condiments complicating things." Alexander took a bite and paused. It was exactly how he liked his sandwiches, something he hadn't even realized he'd missed having someone pay attention to. "How did you?" "Lucky guess. Eat your lunch, Mr. Kane. I'll push your 4 p.m. back by 15 minutes. As Emma turned to leave, Alexander found himself watching her go. There was something graceful about the way she moved, like she was dancing to music only she could hear. Her vintage dress swished around her knees, and he noticed she wore comfortable flats instead of the killer heels most women in this building favored. Everything about her was the opposite of his world's sharp edges and calculated appearances. The real breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Alexander was having his worst day in months. A major acquisition had fallen through, the board was questioning his latest strategy, and his ex-fiancée Sarah had announced her engagement to his former business partner in a very public Wall Street Journal interview. He'd snapped at 3 different department heads, cancelled 2 important meetings, and was seriously considering firing everyone within a 50-foot radius. Emma had watched the storm building all morning. She'd seen Alexander's jaw clench tighter with each phone call, noticed how his typically perfect posture had become rigid with stress. When she brought his 3 p.m. coffee, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of leaving immediately, she sat down in the chair across from his desk. "What are you doing?" Alexander asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Sitting. I can see that." "Why?" "Because you're about to implode, and someone needs to witness it so they can call the paramedics when you have a stress-induced heart attack." Alexander's eyes flashed with anger. "Get out of my office." "No." The single word hung in the air between them. No one said no to Alexander Kane. No one dared to challenge him when he was in this mood. But Emma just sat there, perfectly calm, her hands folded in her lap. "Excuse me. I said no. You hired me to make your life run smoothly, and right now, you're about to make some very expensive mistakes because you're hurt and angry, and you think lashing out at everyone around you will make it feel better. It won't." Alexander stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Sarah's engagement announcement hit the news this morning. The Meridian deal fell through because they got cold feet about your leadership style. The board meeting you thought was confidential? Yeah, rumors are already circulating that they're concerned about your decision-making. You're spiraling, and you're about to take everyone else down with you. How do you know about? Alexander's voice trailed off. He'd underestimated her. Emma wasn't just organized, she was intelligent, observant, and apparently had her finger on the pulse of everything happening in his professional world. "I know because it's my job to know. It's also my job to tell you when you're being an idiot." "You can't talk to me like that." Emma stood up and walked around his desk, stopping directly in front of him. She was close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that made him think of spring mornings and possibilities he'd forgotten existed. "Alexander," she said, using his first name for the first time, "when was the last time someone told you the truth about how you're acting?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Sarah used to call him out when he was being unreasonable, but that was years ago, and even then, it had usually ended in arguments. Since then, he'd surrounded himself with yes-men and employees too afraid to challenge him. "That's what I thought," Emma continued. "Look, I don't care about your money or your power or your reputation. I care about the fact that you're a human being who's in pain, and pain makes people do stupid things. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit back down, you're going to tell me what's really bothering you, and then we're going to figure out how to fix it without you destroying everything you've built." For 34 years, Alexander Kane had been in control of every situation, every conversation, every aspect of his life. But standing there, looking into Emma's warm brown eyes, he felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, crack. Like the first fissure in ice that's been frozen too long. "I can't," he whispered. "Can't what?" "I can't let people in. Every time I do, they leave. And they take pieces of me with them." Emma's expression softened. "Oh, Alexander. Not everyone leaves. And the ones who do, they're not taking pieces of you. They're revealing the pieces that were already broken so you can heal them." Before he could stop himself, Alexander sank back into his chair. For the first time in 3 years, he looked genuinely vulnerable. Not like a CEO, not like a billionaire, just like a man who'd been hurt too many times to trust in happiness anymore. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Do what?" "Be human. Feel things. I built these walls for a reason, Emma. Without them, I'm just broken." Emma pulled her chair around to his side of the desk and sat down beside him. "Broken things can be fixed, Alexander. But first, you have to be willing to let someone see the damage." As she reached out and gently touched his hand, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry all this pain alone anymore. Emma's touch was warm and steady, and for just a moment, the world felt a little less cold. The change in Alexander wasn't immediate, but Emma started noticing small shifts within a few weeks of their breakthrough conversation. He stopped barking orders and started saying, "Please," and "Thank you." He actually listened when she suggested adjustments to his schedule instead of dismissing her input immediately. Most surprisingly, he'd begun staying later to chat when she brought his afternoon coffee. "Tell me about your art," Alexander said one evening as Emma was preparing to leave. It was past 7 p.m., and the office had mostly emptied out, leaving them alone on the 52nd floor. "What about it? Why did you become an artist? And don't say because you're good at it. Lots of people are good at things they don't love." Emma perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, surprised by his genuine curiosity. "Art saved my life, honestly. When I was 15, my parents went through a messy divorce. I was angry all the time, getting into fights at school, headed down a really dark path. Then Mrs. Chen, my art teacher, put a paintbrush in my hand and told me to put all that rage onto the canvas. Did it work? Better than therapy. There's something about creating something beautiful from all that chaos and pain. It transforms you. Art taught me that broken things can become beautiful things if you're patient and kind to yourself." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Is that what you're doing with me? Trying to turn something broken into something beautiful?" The question caught Emma off guard. She'd been attracted to Alexander from the beginning. What woman wouldn't be? He was devastatingly handsome, incredibly intelligent, and underneath all that ice was a gentleness that made her heart race. But she'd been careful not to cross any lines, to keep things professional. "Alexander, It's okay," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I've been wondering why you stay. I know I'm not easy to work with. I know there are other jobs out there that would probably make you happier." Emma stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Manhattan sparkled below them like a jeweled blanket, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of stories. "You want to know why I stay?" she asked without turning around. "Because underneath all that armor you wear, you're one of the kindest people I've ever met. You think you hide it, but you don't. You remember everyone's birthdays. You anonymously paid for your security guard's daughter's surgery. You've been secretly funding 3 art programs in public schools across the city. You think money makes you cold, but you use it to take care of people. You're not broken, Alexander. You're just scared." When she turned back around, Alexander was standing right behind her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You see too much," he said softly. "Maybe you don't see enough." For a moment, they stood there in the growing darkness, the city lights painting patterns across their faces. Emma could feel the pull between them, that magnetic force that had been building for weeks. Alexander raised his hand as if to touch her face, then stopped himself. "Emma, I can't. We work together. It would complicate everything." "Everything's already complicated," she whispered. "The question is whether you're brave enough to let it be complicated in a way that might actually make you happy." Alexander's phone buzzed with an incoming call, breaking the spell. He stepped back, running his hand through his hair, a gesture Emma had learned meant he was fighting with himself. "I should take this," he said, glancing at the phone. "It's Tokyo." Emma nodded and gathered her things. "Have a good evening, Mr. Kane." As she walked toward the elevator, she heard Alexander answer his call, his voice already shifting back into CEO mode. But she'd seen the man underneath, and she knew he'd felt the same electricity she had. The next morning brought a new challenge that would test everything they'd built together. Alexander arrived at the office to find his brother Marcus waiting in his office, uninvited and unwelcome. "Hello, Alex," Marcus said, standing up from Alexander's chair. "Missed me?" Marcus Kane was everything Alexander wasn't: charming, reckless, and completely untrustworthy. 2 years younger but infinitely more manipulative, he'd been cut out of the family business after trying to embezzle funds from a children's charity the company sponsored. What do you want, Marcus? Straight to business. I like that. I want back in, Alex. I want my seat on the board restored, I want my trust fund reinstated, and I want an apology for the way I was treated. Alexander's jaw clenched. You stole money from sick children. There's no coming back from that. I borrowed money with the intention to pay it back. And I would have if you hadn't frozen my accounts and aired our family's dirty laundry in the press. Emma arrived with Alexander's morning coffee just as Marcus's voice was rising. She took one look at the situation and immediately assessed the dynamics. Alexander's rigid posture, the family resemblance between the two men, the toxic energy radiating from the visitor. Mr. Kane, she said to Alexander, your 9 a.m. is here early. Should I reschedule? It was a lie, his 9 a.m. wasn't for another hour. But Emma was giving Alexander an escape route. And who might you be? Marcus asked, his attention shifting to Emma with an appraising look that made Alexander's hands clench into fists. Emma Rodriguez, Mr. Kane's assistant. She kept her voice professional but cool. Well, Emma Rodriguez, you're quite lovely. Alex always did have good taste in assistants. Tell me, how long have you been working for my brother? Long enough to recognize a snake when I see one, Emma replied sweetly. Marcus laughed, but there was nothing pleasant about the sound. Oh, she's feisty. I like her. Alex, we'll continue this conversation later. But don't think this is over. After Marcus left, Alexander slumped in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. That's your brother? Emma asked. Unfortunately, he's going to cause problems. He always does. Emma sat down across from his desk. What kind of problems? Alexander looked at her for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. 3 months ago, he wouldn't have told her anything. Now, the words came easier than they should have. Marcus has a talent for destroying everything I care about. He seduced my last serious girlfriend before Sarah, convinced her I was cheating on her. He's leaked confidential company information to competitors. He thrives on chaos. And you're worried he'll try to destroy what we have. The words hung in the air between them. What did they have? They were employer and employee, but somewhere along the way, they'd become something more. Not quite friends, definitely more than colleagues. Yes, Alexander admitted. Because what we have. Emma, you're the best thing that's happened to me in years. And Marcus has a way of ruining the best things in my life. Emma stood up and walked around the desk, just like she had that day weeks ago when she'd first challenged him. But this time, instead of confronting him, she put her hand on his shoulder. Alexander, look at me. He raised his eyes to meet hers. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever your brother thinks he can do to drive me away, he's wrong. I've survived worse than spoiled rich boys with daddy issues. For the first time since Marcus had appeared, Alexander smiled. A real smile, not the practiced one he used in board meetings. Daddy issues? Oh please, the family drama is written all over both of you. But here's the thing. I didn't fall for the broken boy with trust issues just to run away when things get complicated. Alexander's heart stopped. Fall for? Emma's cheeks flushed as she realized what she'd said. I meant, that is, working for you has been. Emma. She stopped talking and looked at him. I'm falling for you too. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they were ready to cross. But for the first time in 3 years, Alexander Kane was willing to risk his heart for the possibility of something real. Marcus Kane wasn't the type to make idle threats. Within a week of his visit, he'd launched a multi-pronged attack designed to destroy both Alexander's professional reputation and his growing relationship with Emma. It started with whispers. Rumors began circulating through the financial district that Alexander was having inappropriate relationships with his staff, that his judgment was compromised, that Kane Industries was vulnerable because its CEO was distracted by personal drama. The whispers reached the ears of board members, investors, and competitors who smelled blood in the water. Then came the photographs. Someone had been following Emma, taking pictures of her entering and leaving the building, capturing moments when she and Alexander stood close together by the windows of his office. The photos were innocent but taken out of context looked intimate, unprofessional. "We have a problem," Alexander's head of PR, Jennifer Walsh, announced during their emergency morning meeting. She spread a series of tabloid photos across the conference table. "These hit the gossip sites last night. The business journals are picking up the story this morning." Alexander studied the images with growing fury. They showed Emma laughing at something he'd said, the two of them working late with their heads bent over documents, him touching her shoulder in what was clearly a gesture of support but looked like something more intimate in the grainy photos. "Who took these?" he demanded. "We're investigating, but they were sold through an anonymous source. The real problem isn't the photos themselves, it's the narrative they're being used to support. Your leadership is already under scrutiny after the Meridian deal fell through. Now there are questions about your professional judgment." Emma had arrived during the meeting and stood in the doorway, her face pale as she saw the photographs. "This is about me." "Emma, don't." Alexander started. "No, it's okay. I understand what's happening here." She stepped into the room, her spine straight despite the obvious humiliation. "Someone wants to destroy your reputation, and they're using me to do it. The solution is simple." "What solution?" Jennifer asked. Emma looked directly at Alexander, her dark eyes steady and determined. "I resign. Effective immediately. The scandal goes away, your reputation is protected, and Kane Industries can move forward without this distraction." "Absolutely not," Alexander said immediately. "I won't let them win." "This isn't about winning, Alexander. This is about protecting what you've built. Kane Industries employs thousands of people. You have responsibilities that go far beyond." She gestured between them. "Beyond whatever this is." Jennifer cleared her throat. "Actually, Emma's right. If she resigns quietly, we can spin this as a brief professional relationship that ended amicably. The story dies." Alexander felt something crack inside his chest, but this time it wasn't his walls breaking down. It was his heart breaking open. "Get out," he said quietly. "Sir." Jennifer looked confused. "I said get out. Both of you. Now." After Jennifer left, Alexander and Emma stood alone in the conference room, the damning photographs scattered between them like evidence of a crime they'd never committed. "You can't resign," Alexander said. "I have to. You know I do." "No, what you have to do is trust me to handle this. We'll find who's behind it, we'll prove the photos are manipulated or taken out of context, we'll—" "Alexander." Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." He raised his eyes to meet hers, and she saw the truth he'd been trying to hide from himself. He was falling in love with her. Not just attracted, not just interested. Falling in real, deep, scary love for the first time since Sarah had destroyed his ability to trust. "This is exactly what someone wants," Emma continued. "They want you to choose between your company and your heart. They want you to be forced into a position where love costs you everything you've worked for." "Then they don't know me very well. I choose you, Emma. I choose us." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration that changed everything. Emma's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of joy and terror combined. "You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. Emma, I love you. I love your laugh and your terrible taste in vintage dresses and the way you put paint under your fingernails even when you're not painting. I love that you see through all my bullshit and call me out when I'm being an ass. I love that you made me remember what it feels like to be human." Emma closed her eyes, and 2 tears slipped down her cheeks. "Alexander, I love you too. Which is exactly why I have to leave. If I stay, they'll destroy you. Your company, your reputation, everything you've built. I won't be responsible for that. What if I don't care about any of that? But you do care. And you should. Kane Industries isn't just your legacy. It's your father's, your grandfather's. You can't throw it away for me." Alexander walked to the window, staring out at the city he'd conquered but that suddenly felt meaningless without Emma in it. So what are you saying? That love isn't worth fighting for? I'm saying that sometimes loving someone means protecting them from yourself. The conference room door opened, and Marcus Kane walked in without knocking, his timing suspiciously perfect. Well, well, Marcus said, taking in the scene, the scattered photographs, Emma's tears, Alexander's defeated posture. Trouble in paradise? Alexander turned around slowly, his gray eyes cold as winter. You. Me what? I'm just here to offer my condolences on your romantic troubles. Though I have to say, Alex, your taste has improved. She's much prettier than Sarah. You son of a bitch. You hired someone to follow her. Marcus shrugged. I hired someone to document what was already happening. You made it easy, really. All those late nights, all those intimate little conversations. Did you really think no one would notice? Emma stepped forward. What do you want? Smart girl. Straight to business. I want what I've always wanted, my place back in the family company. My trust fund restored. My name cleared. In exchange, the photos go away, the rumors stop, and you get to keep your little love affair private. And if we refuse? Alexander asked. Then by tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in the country will be running a story about how the youngest billionaire CEO in New York is sleeping with his secretary and making business decisions with his heart instead of his head. The board will have no choice but to remove you. Kane Industries' stock will tank. Thousands of jobs will be lost. Emma felt the weight of those thousands of jobs, thousands of families who depended on Kane Industries for their livelihoods. People who had nothing to do with this twisted family drama but who would suffer if she stayed. I'll take the deal, she said quietly. No, Alexander said immediately. Alexander, yes. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about everyone who works for this company, everyone who depends on Kane Industries. I won't be selfish. Marcus smiled, sensing victory. Smart girl. I always said you had good taste in women, Alex. Alexander looked at Emma, seeing the resolution in her eyes, the sacrifice she was preparing to make. In that moment, he realized something that changed everything. Emma wasn't just someone he loved, she was someone worth becoming a better man for. Actually, Marcus, Alexander said, his voice steady and cold. I have a better idea. Emma, do you trust me? Emma looked at him, seeing something new in his gray eyes. Not just love, but strength. The kind of strength that comes from finally knowing who you are and what you're willing to fight for. Yes, she said without hesitation. I trust you. Alexander smiled, and for the first time in his life, it was the smile of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Then let's end this once and for all. What Marcus Kane hadn't counted on was that 3 years of isolation had made Alexander incredibly resourceful. While his brother had been plotting, Alexander had been building, not just a company, but a network of loyalty, respect, and genuine relationships that Marcus couldn't understand or manipulate. The first call Alexander made was to his head of security, David Martinez, a former FBI agent who owed his career to Alexander's mentorship and his daughter's life to Alexander's anonymous funding of her cancer treatment. David, I need you to find out everything about who's been following Emma Rodriguez. Every photographer, every source, every payment. I want a complete chain of evidence within 24 hours. The second call was to Rebecca Stone, the investigative journalist who'd exposed Marcus's embezzlement from the children's charity 2 years earlier. Rebecca owed Alexander nothing, but she'd respected his integrity throughout the investigation and had often wondered why more CEOs weren't willing to hold their own family members accountable. Rebecca, I have a story for you. But this time, I'm not just the source, I'm part of the story. The third call was the hardest. Alexander dialed his father's number in Switzerland, knowing that bringing family drama public again would disappoint the man who'd built Kane Industries from nothing. Dad, I need to tell you something. And I need to ask for your help. While Alexander orchestrated his counterattack, Emma had returned to her small Brooklyn apartment for the first time in weeks. She'd been staying late at the office so often that her own space felt foreign to her now. The walls were covered with her artwork, paintings that captured the beauty she found in everyday moments, the light filtering through subway grates, the faces of her former students, the Manhattan skyline at different times of day. She pulled out a fresh canvas and began to paint, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of brush against surface. But instead of her usual subjects, she found herself painting Alexander, not as the intimidating CEO the world saw, but as the man she'd fallen in love with. Gentle hands despite their strength, eyes that held vulnerability behind the walls, a mouth that smiled so rarely but so beautifully when it did. Her phone rang as she was adding the final touches to the painting. "Emma, it's Alexander. Can you meet me at the office? There's something I need to show you." An hour later, Emma stood in Alexander's office as he pulled up news websites on his computer. The headlines made her gasp. Billionaire CEO's brother orchestrated corporate espionage scandal. Marcus Kane arrested for harassment, extortion. Alexander Kane clears the air. I'm in love with the most remarkable woman I've ever met. "Alexander, what did you do?" "I told the truth," he said simply. "All of it." Marcus hiring photographers, the extortion attempt, the threats against the company. But also the important truth, that I'm in love with you, and I'm not ashamed of it. Emma stared at the screen, reading the quotes attributed to Alexander. "Emma Rodriguez is not just my assistant. She's the woman who taught me that success without love is just expensive loneliness. She challenged me to be better, to feel again, to remember that businesses are built by people, for people. If loving her costs me everything else, then everything else wasn't worth having." "The board meeting is in an hour," Alexander continued. "They're going to vote on whether to remove me as CEO. Marcus thought he was forcing my hand, but he gave me something better, the chance to choose love publicly, without shame or apology." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander, you could lose everything." "I could. But I realized something when I thought I was going to lose you. I've already lost everything that matters if I don't have you. Kane Industries will survive with or without me. But I won't survive without you." Before Emma could respond, Alexander's assistant Jennifer Walsh knocked on the door. "Mr. Kane? The board members are arriving." Alexander straightened his tie and looked at Emma. "Come with me." "To the board meeting?" "Alexander, that's not." "Come with me," he repeated. "Not as my assistant. As the woman I love. As my partner. As my future." The boardroom of Kane Industries had seen many dramatic moments in its 40-year history, but nothing quite like Alexander Kane walking in hand with Emma Rodriguez. The 12 board members, most of them men in their 60s who'd known Alexander since he was a child, watched in surprise as he pulled out a chair for Emma and seated her beside his usual place at the head of the table. "Gentlemen," Alexander began, "and Mrs. Patterson, thank you for coming on such short notice. I know you've seen the news reports. I know there are concerns about my leadership, my judgment, and the future of this company. Before you vote on my removal, I want to tell you a story." For the next 20 minutes, Alexander laid out everything. Marcus's extortion scheme, the harassment Emma had endured, the threats against the company's stability. But more than that, he talked about what Emma had brought to Kane Industries in her short time there. Employee satisfaction in his division was at an all-time high. Productivity had increased 30%. 3 major deals had closed successfully because Emma's organizational skills and emotional intelligence had smoothed over negotiations that were heading toward disaster. "Emma Rodriguez didn't just become my assistant," Alexander concluded. "She became my conscience. She reminded me that this company was built by my grandfather to create jobs, to innovate, to make people's lives better. She helped me remember that numbers on a balance sheet represent real families, real dreams, real lives." Board member Charles Whitman, Alexander's father's oldest friend, spoke first. "Alexander, no one questions that Ms. Rodriguez is talented or that your personal feelings for her are genuine. But the appearance of impropriety." "The only impropriety here," Alexander interrupted, Was my brother's attempt to destroy both my personal happiness and this company's reputation out of spite and greed. I'm not asking you to approve of my relationship. I'm asking you to judge me on my results, on my integrity, and on my commitment to Kane Industries' mission. Emma had been silent throughout the meeting, but now she stood up. If I may say something? The board members looked surprised. This wasn't how corporate governance usually worked. But Alexander nodded encouragingly. I've worked for Kane Industries for 4 months, Emma began. In that time, I've watched your CEO work 18-hour days, sacrifice his personal time and energy, and make decisions that prioritize the company's long-term health over short-term profits. He's donated anonymously to educational programs, protected employees during economic downturns, and maintained the ethical standards his family built this company on. Emma paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from skeptical to curious. But more than that, I've watched a man who had every reason to become cynical and cold choose instead to become vulnerable and human. The Alexander Kane I met 4 months ago was brilliant but isolated. The man sitting beside me now is still brilliant, but he's also compassionate, collaborative, and connected to the people around him. If you think that makes him a worse CEO, then you don't understand what leadership actually means. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Mrs. Patterson, the only woman on the board and the CEO of a major non-profit organization, spoke. Alexander, I have one question for you. Yes, ma'am. If we vote to keep you as CEO, what's your first act going to be? Alexander looked at Emma, then back at the board. I'm going to promote Emma Rodriguez to Vice President of Strategic Operations and give her the authority to implement the employee wellness and community outreach programs she's been developing. Then I'm going to ask her to marry me, and hopefully plan a wedding that doesn't interfere with the quarterly earnings report. The room erupted in surprised laughter, even from the most stern board members. Charles Whitman shook his head with a smile. Alexander Kane, you are definitely your grandfather's grandson. He once told this board that business was too important to be left to businessmen, that we needed artists and dreamers and people who could see possibilities the rest of us missed. The vote was unanimous. Alexander Kane would remain CEO of Kane Industries. As the board members filed out, congratulating Alexander and welcoming Emma to the company's executive leadership, Emma found herself alone with a man who had just risked everything for love. Did you mean what you said about marrying me? She asked, her heart racing. Alexander got down on one knee right there in the boardroom, pulling out a ring box he'd been carrying in his pocket for 2 weeks. Ever since the day he'd realized that Emma wasn't just someone he loved, but someone he wanted to build a life with. Emma Rodriguez, he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, you taught me that the best investments aren't in stocks or bonds or companies. They're in people, in love, in the courage to be vulnerable. Will you marry me? Emma looked down at the man kneeling before her, not a billionaire CEO, not a powerful businessman, but simply the person she loved most in the world. A man who had chosen her over everything else, who had risked his entire empire for the chance to build something more valuable with her. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Alexander Kane, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma realized that sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen not when someone changes who they are, but when they finally become who they were always meant to be. 6 months later, Alexander and Emma were married in a small ceremony in Central Park, surrounded by friends, family, and several dozen Kane Industries employees who had become like family. Marcus Kane was conspicuously absent. He was serving a 2-year sentence for corporate espionage and extortion. Alexander's father gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. My son built an empire, but Emma taught him to build a home. And I think we all know which one is the more impressive achievement. As Alexander and Emma danced their first dance as husband and wife, the Manhattan skyline twinkling behind them, Emma whispered in his ear, "No regrets." Alexander pulled back to look at her face, radiant in the soft light of the paper lanterns they'd strung through the trees. "Only one." "What's that?" "I regret waiting so long to realize that the best CEOs don't just manage companies, they inspire people. And the best people don't just succeed, they love. Thank you for teaching me the difference." Emma smiled and pulled him closer. Thank you for being brave enough to learn." As they swayed together under the stars, surrounded by everyone they loved, Alexander Kane realized that he had finally found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not success, not power, not wealth, but something infinitely more valuable. A partner who saw him not for what he had accomplished, but for who he could become. The billionaire CEO had offered her a job, never thinking she'd teach him to love again. But sometimes the best investments are the ones you never see coming, and the greatest returns come from the risks you take with your heart. And they all lived wealthily ever after, not just in money, but in love, laughter, and the daily choice to see each other not as they were, but as they could be together.